In 1906, a journalist named Alfred Henry Lewis wrote a line that has haunted every national security planner, emergency management official, and food logistics expert for over a century. He wrote that there are only 9 meals between mankind and anarchy. 9 meals, that is 3 days. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 72 hours, and then the thin veneer of civilization that separates the United States of America from total chaos simply dissolves. And what I am about to tell you is that in April 2026, this country is closer to testing that theory than it has been at any point since the Great Depression. Your city, whether it is New York or Nashville, Chicago or Charlotte, Los Angeles or Louisville, operates on a food supply system so fragile, so stripped of any margin for error, so dependent on a chain of interconnected systems that are all simultaneously under stress, that a disruption lasting less than a week could trigger panic, hoarding, violence, and societal breakdown in communities that most Americans consider safe, stable, and prosperous. The average American grocery store carries approximately 72 hours of inventory at any given time. That is not a stockpile. That is a rolling conveyor belt of food that arrives on diesel-burning trucks, gets scanned at loading docks by digital systems, is placed on shelves by workers earning near minimum wage, and is replenished on a schedule so precise that a single disruption anywhere in the chain can leave sections of the store empty within a day. We saw this during the pandemic when people were stunned that the richest country in human history could run out of chicken, toilet paper, and baby formula. But what most Americans still do not understand is that the pandemic did not expose a flaw in the system. It revealed that the system itself is the flaw. It was designed for maximum efficiency and minimum cost, not for resilience, and every single stress point in that system is currently being pushed harder than it has ever been pushed before. Let me walk you through exactly how the food gets to your plate, because once you understand the mechanics, you will understand why the whole thing is one bad week away from falling apart. The modern American food supply chain operates on a model called just-in-time delivery. That means nothing is stored, nothing is warehoused in excess, nothing is held in reserve. Every barcode scanned at a checkout counter sends a signal to a warehouse. The warehouse sends a signal to a distribution center. The distribution center sends a signal to a truck. The truck picks up the product and delivers it on a schedule calculated down to the hour. If the truck does not arrive, the shelf goes empty. There is no backup inventory sitting in a storeroom behind the deli counter. Before this system was adopted in the 1980s and 1990s, the food supply chain was fault-tolerant. Agriculture was regional. Thousands of small farms in each region supplied local stores. Problems in one area did not cascade to other areas. People lived closer to where their food was grown, and supply chains were short and resilient. Today, the average meal in America travels approximately 1,500 miles from farm to plate. A head of lettuce grown in Salinas, California travels nearly 3,000 miles to reach a grocery store in New York. Your bananas come from Central America. Your coffee comes from Brazil or Colombia or Ethiopia. Your seafood, over 80% of it is imported. Your fresh fruit, roughly 60%, comes from outside the country. Every single one of those supply lines depends on affordable diesel, functioning ports, operational shipping routes, stable trade relationships, and digital logistics systems that coordinate the movement of billions of pounds of food across oceans and continents every single week. When diesel hits $5.40 per gallon, as it has right now, the cost of moving every single item increases simultaneously. When the Strait of Hormuz is blockaded, fertilizer supplies are cut, fuel prices spike, and the entire agricultural input chain is disrupted at the same moment. When truckers are going bankrupt and parking their rigs because they cannot afford to operate, the conveyor belt slows down. And when the conveyor belt slows down, the 72-hour buffer at your local grocery store starts shrinking. Here is what happens in your city when the food stops arriving, and I want you to picture this not as some dystopian movie scenario, but as the documented, studied, war-gamed assessment of what emergency management officials expect based on every simulation they have ever run. In the first 24 hours, most people do not notice anything is wrong. Maybe one section of the store looks a little thin. Maybe the brand of bread you usually buy is not there. You shrug and grab something else. By hour 36, social media starts buzzing. People post photos of empty shelves. Local news runs a segment. Some people, the ones who pay attention, start buying extra. By hour 48, the buying becomes competitive. People are loading carts with 2 or 3 times their normal purchases. The psychology of scarcity kicks in, and it is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. You do not need to be hungry to panic. You just need to believe that you might become hungry. By 72 hours, which is 9 meals, the store shelves are stripped bare, not picked over. Bare, the meat is gone, the bread is gone, the canned goods are gone, the water is gone, the baby formula is gone, and now the real crisis begins. Because the people who did not get to the store in time, the elderly person who could not drive, the single mother who was at work, the family living paycheck to paycheck who did not have the money to stock up, those people have nothing. And the trucks that were supposed to refill the shelves are not coming, because the disruption that caused the shortage in the first place, whether it was a cyber attack, a fuel crisis, a trucker strike, a natural disaster, or a cascading infrastructure failure, has not been resolved. At this point, according to emergency planners, the social contract begins to fray. Neighbors who have been friendly for years become potential threats. Food becomes currency. Desperation replaces courtesy. And law enforcement, which is already stretched thin in most American cities, faces the impossible task of maintaining order across an entire metropolitan area where millions of people are simultaneously hungry and afraid. What makes the current moment in April 2026 so uniquely dangerous is that every single component of the food supply chain is under simultaneous stress in a way that has never occurred before in modern American history. Start with diesel. The fuel that moves over 80% of all agricultural products in this country is at $5.40 per gallon nationally, over $7 in California, and has surged more than 50% in 5 weeks because of the Iran war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Trucking companies are collapsing. Owner-operators are parking their rigs because the cost of running them exceeds their revenue. FTR Transportation Intelligence recorded the largest fuel cost increase over a 3-week period in the history of American trucking. Now add fertilizer. Urea prices have jumped 39 to 46% because the Strait of Hormuz, through which a third of the world's urea supply normally transits, is effectively closed. China has restricted urea exports until at least August 2026. European nitrogen production is running at 75% capacity. Farmers are heading into planting season facing record input costs, with farm sector debt projected to hit $624.7 billion. Now add labor. Immigration enforcement has intensified, raising concerns about farm worker availability during harvest season. The average age of an American farmer is 58, and younger generations are walking away from agriculture because the economics no longer work. Now add the safety net collapse. SNAP benefits have been cut for 3 to 4 million people. Food bank funding has been stripped. The government has discontinued the annual food security survey that tracks hunger in America. Now add grocery store economics. Industry analysts predict a sea change with more stores closing and chains merging in response to tariffs, farm labor shortages, and rising costs. Supermarket profit margins were already razor-thin before the war. Add 40 to 50% diesel increases on top of already elevated prices, and some stores will simply close, particularly in low-income neighborhoods that were already food deserts. 19 million Americans already live in food deserts where the nearest grocery store is more than a mile away in urban areas, or more than 10 miles in rural areas. When diesel costs make it unprofitable to deliver to those stores, or when the stores themselves close, those communities go from underserved to unserved. There is a dimension of urban food vulnerability that almost nobody talks about, and it is the fact that the larger and more prosperous your city appears, the more catastrophically fragile its food supply actually is. New York City, the largest city in America, does not grow any meaningful amount of food. It imports virtually everything its 8.3 million residents eat, plus the food consumed by millions of daily commuters and tourists, through a handful of distribution hubs, rail terminals, and highway corridors. If the George Washington Bridge, the Lincoln Tunnel, and the Holland Tunnel were simultaneously closed, whether by a natural disaster, a terror attack, or a cascading infrastructure failure, the food supply to Manhattan would be effectively severed. The island has almost zero agricultural capacity. It has no significant food warehousing. It has restaurants and grocery stores that operate on daily deliveries. Los Angeles imports roughly 75% of its oil and significant portions of its food and water from outside the region. Its water comes from aqueducts stretching hundreds of miles across the desert. Its food arrives on trucks that burn diesel that now costs over $7 a gallon in the state. Houston, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Atlanta, every major American city is a net food importer that depends entirely on external supply lines that are themselves dependent on affordable energy, functioning infrastructure, and stable logistics networks. And these cities are growing. The United States is more urbanized than at any point in its history. Over 80% of Americans live in urban areas. That means over 260 million people are concentrated in environments that produce almost no food and store almost none. They are entirely dependent on a just-in-time delivery system that was designed for efficiency, not survival. When that system works, it is a marvel of modern logistics. When it breaks, 260 million people discover simultaneously that there is no plan B. I want to talk about the digital vulnerability that makes all of this exponentially worse. Because the food supply chain is not just dependent on trucks and fuel and farms, it is dependent on software. A study published in April 2026 revealed that the modern food distribution system has become so reliant on digital authorization and tracking systems that food can be physically sitting in a warehouse ready to ship and be completely unable to move because the software that authorizes its release, verifies its safety certification, processes its shipping manifest, and coordinates its insurance has gone down. Researchers studying UK food system vulnerabilities found that within 72 hours of a digital system failure, inventory records fall completely out of sync with physical reality, and manual backup procedures no longer exist because companies eliminated paper-based systems years ago. The JBS ransomware attack in 2021 temporarily shut down the largest meat processing company in the world across operations in the United States, Canada, and Australia. The Colonial Pipeline attack that same year disrupted fuel supplies across the entire southeastern United States. The food supply chain runs on the same kinds of digital infrastructure that was compromised in those attacks. A targeted cyber attack on the logistics systems that coordinate food distribution across a major metro area would not need to destroy a single truck or spoil a single crate of produce. It would just need to make the system forget where everything is and prevent the authorization of shipments. The food would exist, the trucks would exist, the drivers would be available, but the digital system that connects them would be paralyzed. And in a world where paper backup systems have been eliminated, nobody would know how to move the food manually. The shelves would go empty with warehouses full, and the 72-hour clock would start ticking on every grocery store in the affected region. Only 36% of Americans have even a 3-day emergency food supply in their homes, according to FEMA. That means nearly 2/3 of the country has nothing, absolutely nothing, between them and hunger if the supply chain breaks for even 72 hours. Most American households shop weekly or more frequently, buying just enough food for a few days at a time. The pantry that your grandmother kept stocked with canned goods, dried beans, rice, and preserved vegetables, the one that could sustain a family for weeks if necessary, barely exists anymore in modern America. Refrigerators and freezers, which most families rely on for the majority of their food storage, become useless within 24 to 48 hours of a power outage. And as we have already discussed in detail, the power grid is itself operating on margins so thin that 13 of 23 assessment regions face elevated or high reliability risks. So the scenario is not just a food supply disruption, it is a food supply disruption combined with a potential power outage, combined with a diesel crisis that prevents trucks from running, combined with a digital system vulnerability that could paralyze logistics, combined with a financial system that goes dark when the power goes out, meaning you cannot use a credit card, a debit card, Apple Pay, or any other electronic payment method to buy the food that is not on the shelves of the store that is not open because it has no power. Cash becomes the only viable currency, and most Americans do not carry cash. The convergence of these vulnerabilities is not theoretical. Every single one of them is actively being stressed right now in April 2026. The Iran war is driving up diesel and fertilizer costs. Truckers are going bankrupt. Farmers are losing money for the 4th straight year. SNAP has been cut. Food banks are overwhelmed. The grid is strained. Cyber attacks are increasing. And the 9-meal clock is ticking in every city in America, waiting for the one disruption, just one, that pushes the system past its breaking point. The most unsettling truth about all of this is that no one in a position of authority is being honest with you about how close we are. No governor is going to hold a press conference and tell you that your city is 9 meals away from chaos, because saying it out loud would trigger the very panic that makes the scenario worse. No FEMA administrator is going to publicly acknowledge that federal response capabilities are inadequate for a multi-city food supply failure, because that admission would undermine public confidence in the institutions that are supposed to protect you. No grocery chain CEO is going to announce that their stores operate on a 72-hour rolling inventory with zero surge capacity, because that would send customers into a hoarding spiral that would empty every shelf in the country by sundown. So instead, everyone stays quiet. The system continues operating on razor-thin margins, the diesel keeps getting more expensive, the truckers keep going bankrupt, the farmers keep losing money, the fertilizer keeps getting scarcer, the digital systems keep getting more complex and more vulnerable. The safety net keeps getting cut, and 330 million Americans keep walking into grocery stores every day, filling their carts, swiping their cards, and assuming that the food will always be there because it has always been there. That assumption, that normalcy bias, is the most dangerous force in the American food system right now, because the system was never designed to guarantee that the food would always be there. It was designed to deliver the food as cheaply as possible, as fast as possible, with the smallest possible inventory and the thinnest possible margins. Every ounce of resilience was traded for efficiency. Every buffer was removed in the name of profit. Every backup was eliminated because backups cost money. And what remains is a system that works perfectly until it does not, and when it stops working, 260 million urbanized Americans who grow no food, store no food, and carry no cash will discover in approximately 9 meals that civilization is not a permanent condition. It is a service, and the service can be interrupted. And here is the final piece that connects everything together into the most alarming picture imaginable. The World Food Program has warned that 45 million additional people globally could fall into acute food insecurity if the Iran conflict continues and oil stays above $100 a barrel. When food crises erupt in developing nations, the consequences do not stay contained within those borders. Immigration pressures increase as people flee hunger. Geopolitical instability worsens as food-stressed populations revolt. Export restrictions tighten as countries hoard their own food supplies, which further reduces what is available on global markets that the United States depends on for 15% of its overall food supply and far higher percentages of specific categories like coffee, cocoa, seafood, and fresh fruit. The global grain stock-to-use ratio has dropped to 29.9%. Signaling tightening supplies even as production hits record levels. Wheat prices are up 13% since December. Avian flu has killed 185 million birds in the United States since 2022, with no approved vaccine for widespread use. Cauliflower prices fluctuated 230% in 2025 because of weather chaos in California. A single peanut butter manufacturing failure in February 2026 triggered a recall of over 20,000 products across 40 states. The system is so tightly wound that any individual shock reverberates through the entire network. And right now, there are not 1 or 2 shocks hitting the system. There are a dozen, all at once, all compounding each other, all hitting a food supply chain that was built with zero redundancy and zero reserve capacity. Alfred Henry Lewis wrote his warning in 1906 when most Americans still grew their own food, kept root cellars, preserved meat, and lived within walking distance of farms. In 2026, the average American lives in a city, buys food daily from a store that restocks every 72 hours, has no emergency food supply, carries no cash, and depends entirely on a digital logistics system powered by a fragile electrical grid burning fuel that costs 50% more than it did 5 weeks ago. We are not 9 meals from anarchy. We are closer than that. And the only thing standing between your city and total chaos is a system that everyone assumes will keep working because it always has. Until the day it does not.